Is PJ Fleck a top 25 coach in the Power 4 conferences? I think there's a case.
You are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
What's up? You are listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're talking about, is Coach Fleck a top 25 coach in the Power 4 conference? Because CBS Sports dropped an article and he did not make the cut, but I think there are a couple that were on that list that maybe should not have been in front of him. We're going to dive into those thoughts today. We're also going to talk about which game is the most important game for the Gophers in the first half of their season, which is most critical for them. And then finally, we're going to talk about how Max Brosmer's leadership starts this offseason and how it can help this team be its best version of itself heading into this season. So definitely be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube so you don't miss any of the daily Gophers content coming forward. And on top of that, let's get right into it. So if you listen on audio platforms, please leave a 5-star review, help others find the show. But let's talk about, is PJ Fleck a top 25 coach in the Power 4 conferences? Now, looking at CBS Sports, they released their top 25 Power 4 college football coaches entering the 2024 football season. And you know what? When I looked at the top 15 of this list, I was like, yo, that's not bad. I can't even really argue with it. You got Kirby Smart at 1, Ryan Day at 2. Maybe you want him a little lower because he hasn't actually won anything big as far as the national championship or anything, but he's gotten there and he's gotten multiple CFP opportunities. So I'm not going to fault him for it. They got Dabo Swinney at 3, Brian Kelly at 4, Steve Sarkisian at 5, Kyle Whittingham at 6, Kalen DeBoer at 7, Mike Norvell at 8, Dan Lanning at 9, and Lincoln Riley of USC at 10. So your typical schools there, your typical head coaches: Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, Texas, Utah, Alabama, Florida State, Oregon, and USC. Now, if all those, maybe Kyle Whittingham feels a little bit high, but I'm okay with it. I think he is overachieved in some occasions, and I am totally fine with that top 10. At 11, you got Penn State's James Franklin. 12, you got Kansas's Lance Leopold. 13, Kansas State's Chris Kleiman. 14, Ole Miss's Lane Kiffin. And 15, Oklahoma State's Mike Gundy. Now, again, I have no arguments. I see a case for all these guys. They've had some big years. They've had some turned low-tier schools into higher expectation schools and winning schools that find their way in the top 25. So I am not here to argue any of them. Plain and simple. I can respect it. I'm not even going to fight it. 16 is a strange one for me. Now, I think he has a strong case to be in the top 25, but 16 is far too high, and that is North Carolina State's Dave Doeren. Now, I think he could be more in that 20 to 25 range as opposed to 16. I actually probably would have him closer to 23 to 25, but overall he comes in at 16. Fickle at 17, Iowa's Kirk Ferentz at 18, Jeff Brom of Louisville at 19, and Mark Stoops of Kentucky at 20. Now, I think all of those coaches are earning and deserving of a top 25 bid. Doran's the only one where I'm like, yeah, maybe, but maybe I would switch some of the orders of these things. I think I'd still have Ferentz above Luke Fickle, even though Luke Fickle has a CFP with the Cincinnati team. That Cincinnati team was just absolutely stacked. So until Luke Fickle can prove it to me again with Wisconsin, I'd probably keep Ferentz ahead of him. Jeff Brom with Louisville, they had a really good year this past year, but prior to that, Jeff Brom, I don't know how much credit I want to give him. I think 19 might be too much. I'd put him more, again, back half of that top 25. You got Eli Drinkowitz of Missouri at 21, Sonny Dykes of TCU at 22, Josh Heupel of Tennessee at 23, Marcus Freeman of Notre Dame at 24, and Matt Campbell of Iowa State at 25. So looking at this list, nothing is like, whoa, absolutely not, besides number 25 for me. That one, I do not see it. I do not think that he is a better coach than PJ Fleck. And I also think Dave Doeren is in a similar tier as PJ Fleck. So I think I wanted to take a deeper dive at those three and their numbers across their collegiate careers, because looking at this list, is it correct? I think they got a lot of things right. I won't argue too much with it, but I think that back half is where things get a little bit dicey. Now, how many Big Ten coaches were in this list? You had 6 with Ryan Day of Ohio State and Lanning of Oregon, Lincoln Riley of USC, James Franklin of Penn State, and then Luke Fickell of Wisconsin, and Kirk Ferentz of Iowa. It's not terribly off in my opinion. I probably would have had Fleck in that 7 to 9 range. So could he be at 25? I think he has a case. I think depending on how Matt Rule's tenure with Nebraska goes in these next couple of seasons, he has a strong case. I think both of those coaches would be in my 7 to 9 range in the Big Ten as it currently stands. So I think they're right on the cusp of that top 25. Now, looking past that, who on this list, and the top 25 I'm completely okay with. Like I said, Fickell's a little bit high for me right now. Doran's way too high for me. Jeff Brom is a little bit too high for me. But who shouldn't be on the list? I think there is no reason at all that Matt Campbell should be on the top 25 list. And again, Doran's like right on the edge for me. So let's compare those three coaches. PJ Fleck, who is our coach, compared to Matt Campbell and Dave Doran in their tenures as coaches. Now with PJ Fleck, you've got 2 double-digit win seasons in your time as a head coach, one with each of the programs you've been with. With Western Michigan, he had a 13-1 season. And then with Minnesota, he had an 11-2 season. He has a 58.8 win percentage that was above 60% until the struggle year this past season. That being said, he's still 6-2 in bowl games. In 11 years of coaching, he has had 7 years of above 500 play. Now looking at Matt Campbell, 0 double-digit win seasons, 58.3 win percentage, which is lower than Coach Fleck's, 4-5 in bowl games, which is far worse. And then 12 years of coaching, he has had 10 years above 500, but like I said, has never hit double digits in wins. And then finally, you've got Dave Doran. Dave Doran, 2 double-digit win seasons, both of them with Northern Illinois University. They did not come with his time at North Carolina State, and he has a 62.7 win percentage overall in his career, but that is heavily skewed by those 2 years with Northern Illinois. If you take those 2 years out, he's sitting at 58.3, which is the exact same as Matt Campbell. So like I said, those 2 NIU years were huge for Doran. Now, he is also 4-5 in bowl games, so much less success. And when you think about these teams, Iowa State, North Carolina State, Gophers, all of them are in similar tier level bowl games. They are all played in bowl games that are probably usually in that lower tier, a couple sprinkled in the higher tier, New Year's Six type tiers. But overall, Coach Fleck 6-2, the other 2 4-5. And then, like I said, the double-digit win seasons. You talk about Matt Campbell in a lower conference of the Big 12. And the Big 12 has been on the rise as of late, but still, it is not the Big 10. It is not the SEC. He has 0 double-digit win seasons, whereas PJ Fleck has 1 double-digit win season in the Big 10 and another with Western Michigan, where he only lost 1 game in a 13-1 season. So overall, outside of the coaching on the field itself, how has recruiting looked? Well, over the last 7 years, Minnesota has been 37th, 46th, 49th, 38th, 38th, 45th, and 38th. They've never been outside of the top 50. They've been inside of the top 44 times, but never inside of the top 30. Now, looking at North Carolina State, you've got 28th, 43rd, 64th, 36th, 44th, 32nd, and 26th. Definitely the best of the 3 here. Outside of the top 50 once, inside of the top 43 times, and twice in the top 30. And then finally, Iowa State, 53rd, 42nd, 39th, 59th, 46th, 46th, 55th. Outside of the top 50 on 3 out of those 7 years, and in the top 40 only once. So I do not think Matt Campbell has a case whatsoever to be in this top 25. This person must have been an alum of the Iowa State college or university. They must have been a big friend of Matt Campbell's or something. They're buying in on the Brock Purdy hype, the Breece Hall hype, and they're attributing it directly to Matt Campbell's coaching because he has no case to be a top 25 coach. I am not hearing it. I am not feeling it. And Coach Fleck definitely deserves that spot over him. I would even almost give Coach Rule that spot over him, especially if he can get Nebraska back on the map. I think that is just the only big blemish on this list, and I think Coach Fleck has a case. I would maybe have the case of Coach Fleck being in that 23 to 27 range, 23 to 28 range within the top coaches in the college football landscape. What are your thoughts? I want to hear them down below in the comments over on YouTube, but let me know what you're thinking. And we're going to shift our perspective a little bit towards this upcoming season. We're going to talk about what is the most critical game in the first half of Minnesota's season, the first 6 games, which could surprise you. We're going to dive into that coming up next. First, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel because it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel gives you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you want to go and you want to take a stab at the Timberwolves winning Game 7 and moving themselves to the Western Conference Finals for the first time since 2003 with KG and crew, then go place a $5 bet. And when they get that dub, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Or if you're the type that wants to, double down and help yourself win either way, if you're rooting for the Timberwolves, you could bet against them. Pick the Nuggets. So if the Nuggets win your $5 bet, you get $150 in bonus bets. But if the Nuggets lose, who cares if you don't get the bonus bets because the Timberwolves are on the way to the Western Conference Finals. Regardless, it is an amazing deal for new customers over at FanDuel. And now is the time to take advantage where you can bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. All right, Gopher fans, if you are just diehard Minnesota sports, everything you can do, everything you can consume when it comes to Minnesota sports, then you are missing out if you haven't checked out Locked On Minnesota Sports, where we have a 24/7 streaming channel live talking about all things Minnesota sports, from the Gophers to the Timberwolves to the Vikings to the Wild and so much more. So be sure to check it out over there. Be sure to hit subscribe and check out the 24/7 daily streaming channel over at Locked On Minnesota Sports. But let's talk about which game is the most important game for the Minnesota Gophers in the 2024 football season. Now, we're talking about the first half of the season. That's a 12-game season without a bowl game or anything of that sort. So first 6 games for Minnesota are versus North Carolina, versus Rhode Island, versus Nevada, versus Iowa, at Michigan, and versus USC. That's right. 5 of Minnesota's first 6 games on the year are home games. Now, that could be hugely advantageous for Minnesota if they can capitalize and really secure that home field advantage, really push the edge and make sure you win your games at home. That's another reason why we talked about last week why home improvement is a major factor in the 2024 season for PJ Fleck and crew, because if they can take care of the wins at home and win 5 of their 7 home games, they are sitting pretty when it comes to putting themselves in the position to be competitive in this newer Big Ten conference. Now, that also means that the back half of this year is constantly on the road, making the element of losing a game a little bit more questionable, a little bit more dangerous, losing a game that you shouldn't lose, like in Illinois, like a Rutgers, where Minnesota still could be favored. But that element becomes a little bit more dangerous when it is on the road. Even UCLA, those type of games, Minnesota is going to potentially be tighter down to the wire because of that road element. So Minnesota's going to have to clean it up at home to make sure that they put themselves in the best possible situations for the 2024 season. They need a bounce back after last year going 6-7. Now, if Minnesota has a huge first half of the season and wins 4 to 5 games, it could set them up for a really big potential year back into the 9+ win category, back into getting more recognition, back into PJ Fleck being considered a top 25 coach by these national media outlets. But if they don't, if they have a rough first half of the season, then that could spell some ugly things for Minnesota and some questions being asked by the end of the season. Now, which game will be the most important or the most critical? What holds the most weight in those first 6 games? Now, I definitely won't say Nevada. I won't say Rhode Island, because those should be auto wins. Those should be wins that you absolutely blow those teams out of the water, put things together, and really get your team chemistry going. I also won't say the only road game at Michigan, because as important as it is, it's not going to be the most important in this grouping, because that will be an anticipated loss by many. That said, if Minnesota is able to steal that game on the road, that is a major bonus, a major momentum swing and builder for a huge year. So if Minnesota can pull that off, that would be absolutely fantastic. But we're not going to call it a most critical game when most people are going to have Minnesota as heavy underdogs in that game. So that leaves us with 3 potential options in the first half of the season. That's versus North Carolina, the season opener of the game of the year. Week 4 versus Iowa, a rivalry game and your first Big Ten game of the season, or versus USC, your first new team in the Big Ten Conference, first opportunity to play that type of opponent, a high-powered offense, Lincoln Riley coach team that will be. It'll have the hype behind it. It'll have the glamour of LA behind it, but it could be a tone setter and likely seen again as a loss by many. It could be seen in a similar light as a Michigan, where all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, the Gophers can't win that game." The Gophers hang around, and all of a sudden people start to give them more respect. So I won't call the USC game a critical game, just like we're not going to call the Michigan game a critical game, but both of those could have high upside for the Gophers if they can pull off the upset. So for those latter reasons, like I said, we're going to rule out USC for the same reasons as Michigan, but a win is a bonus. So between setting the tone strong versus North Carolina at home or a rivalry game are the biggest moments, in my opinion, the most critical games for the Gophers in their first 6 games, the first half of 2024. And I think a case can be made for either, because if you set the tone with North Carolina and you win big, that can help you really spur momentum, because then you got cleanup games for the next 2 games, and to really get things going, get juices flowing, get momentum building, get chemistry going, and have a team that's ready to move forward into the Big Ten season. That could be huge. But on the flip side of that, if somehow you drop that North Carolina game, but you go on, you win the next 2 games, and then you beat Iowa, that can spur some real momentum, and the impacts of a Big Ten schedule have a little bit more weight on that game. So if you beat Iowa at home, not only keep the rivalry trophy and keep things going, you're going on the road to Michigan coming off of a big win. So hopefully you can have some momentum there. Or when you come back home versus USC, hopefully you have some momentum going from a big win like against Iowa. So I think that, in my opinion, the most important game is the Iowa game. It holds more weight being a conference game. It's possibly a team that could be ranked at that point in the season. It's a rivalry game, and especially with how last year's game ended between those 2 teams. And Minnesota getting that win, but people calling it controversial, even though rules are rules, and I'm not going to get into it now. That is the most critical game of Minnesota's first 6 games of the regular season. This is going to be a heated game. It's going to hold a lot of weight, and a win could also spur momentum into that Michigan game the following week, the first road game. So in my opinion, the most critical game of the first half of 2024 will be versus the Iowa Hawkeyes, with Minnesota looking to keep Floyd home for back-to-back years here in Dinkytown. Let me know your thoughts below. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you disagree, if North Carolina is more important, or if you have a different answer. In tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about the second half of the season and what is the most critical game or the hinge point in that second half of the season. So be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss that, and tap in tomorrow to listen to that update. But to wrap off today's show, I want to talk about the bond of the offense that is beginning now. Max Brosmer is showing his leadership, and it could raise the ceiling of this Minnesota team. We're going to dive into that coming up next. All right, Gophers fans, we're wrapping this one up because I want to talk about what is going on with Max Brosmer and his teammates, his skill positions, his other quarterbacks in his room. They are all working out. They're taking the extra step right now down in the Georgia area. And Max Brosmer is taking the leadership upon his shoulders in not only uniting this team on the field, but also off the field, which can be huge for the long-term upside of this team, both this season and moving forward. Now, during this spring break, this man got a few of the wide receivers and quarterbacks together in Georgia, and they began to work on timing and chemistry. That happened a while back in spring break in the March period. And he was with Elijah Spencer, Lemeki Brockington, Kenrick Lanier, and then his other quarterbacks. Now, that was just the appetizer. It was just a taste, because he brought an even bigger group with him in this May period. And now, from cliff jumping to playing cards to boating to Georgia Aquarium to going to a Braves game, then you've got the actual workouts at the Adapt Gym with multiple professionals out there, on top of at Centennial High School where Max Brosmer played. All of that, and working with Max Brosmer's mental coaches, this group is doing everything it can to speed up the chemistry process and hopefully help this Minnesota team take a bigger step forward and bounce back off of a down year. Now, players include Drake Lindsey, future quarterback, could be future quarterback one of this team, Max Shikajansky, Dylan Whitkey, who is a transfer quarterback from Virginia Tech. That's the whole QB room. On top of that, you've got Nick Callerup, Jamison Gears, Pierce Walsh. I think those three tight ends are going to be the three tight ends that see the most reps with the ones this upcoming season. Then you've got Lemeki Brockington, wide receiver one in Daniel Jackson's second team all conference in the Big Ten. Kenrick Lanier, Darius Taylor, who led the entire nation in rush yards per game. A new transfer receiver in Tyler Williams coming from Georgia. And then, of course, quarterback Max Brosmer himself. Now, this is the type of extra work that could help take this team back to the success of 9+ win seasons, and hopefully taking down their rivals, and hopefully pulling off unexpected upsets. And an article, I want to talk about this. The larger world is taking notice. Even the larger media, the New York Times, took notice and did a story on it through The Athletic in one of their most recent articles. On top of that, record-setting quarterback and alumni Tanner Morgan took to Twitter and simply tweeted, "Leader." It's getting recognized more and more that Max Brosmer is really putting things upon his own shoulders, and that leader aspect that Tanner Morgan has mentioned has been very apparent. Max Brosmer can break down the film with the best of them. He has taken the ownership and the leadership of this team since he joined the practices back in the bowl prep, and he was voted a captain by his teammates in just a couple of quick months, based on his actions, based on what he has done to bring this team together. And now he's putting in the extra work to make it happen on the field. If he makes a successful transition to the FBS and successful in his production and shows similar numbers, or even a higher, like a 2,500 and 20 touchdowns, 15 touchdowns passing next season for the Gophers, and he can find some nice success, he can help this Gophers team, but he also can take a big step towards his dreams of the NFL. And that's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration. That's not me just being a homer and talking about, oh yeah, the Gophers quarterback could beat an NFL guy. No, he is getting that interest. He was listed on a watch list for Senior Bowl invites because the interest is there, because Max Brosmer can read the field. Max Brosmer can get through progressions. Max Brosmer can break down the film. He's shown his leadership characteristics, and if he shows the production translation from that FCS that he's shown, he can play at a high level. And if you can come to a team over here in Minnesota that hasn't had a good passing game since the 2019 season and make it look sufficeable, make it look like at least in the middle of the country type passing game, fix the passing game overall, well, let me tell you right now, scouts are going to be interested, plain and simple. Now, I'm highly encouraged and excited to see where this extra work will hopefully take this team, both in 2024, but also long term. You got to think all of the quarterback room is there. All of those young guys, Shikenjansky, Lindsey, Whitkey, all of those guys are out there. Tyler Williams, who's a redshirt freshman. Who else? You've got Kendrick Lanier, who's a redshirt freshman. Darius Taylor, who is a sophomore this upcoming year. A lot of the focal of this offense moving forward could continue to keep this momentum and tradition going. So hopefully whoever takes over the reins at quarterback in the following season keeps this tradition going, keeps the extra work going, and the Gophers can find a way to get it done. But I am looking forward to the season regardless. I hope you are as well. That's going to do it for us today on Locked On Golden Gophers. I hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to tap in tomorrow. We'll cover that second half of the season. We will also talk about if Minnesota was in a lower conference, how would they fare? And finally, I'm hoping we'll jump into some 2025-26 names for the Gophers that they have interest in those recruiting classes. That's going to do it for us. I'll see you tomorrow. Row the boat, Sky, my Gophers, as always. And don't forget to hit subscribe.